Hey y'all, it's me again, Bonnie Violet. I just wanted to take a second and thank my Patreon members. Patreon members are folks who contribute on a monthly basis anywhere from $3 to $150 a month to support the work of a queer chaplain. Big shout out to Victoria Thompson, Jason Brandt, Brandon Stanton, Kim Silva, Brandy McCarg, Randy Sandknop, Bob Kaiser, Joey Heckmeister, Violet Rhiannon, Gabriel, Jonathan, Petrick, and Todd Atkins Whitley. Thank you so much for your continued contributions. And if you're interested in joining the Patreon, just check the link in the description. Go to patreon.com/Bonnie Violet. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
There should be like a recording button.
Okay. I got it. Thank you.
Super. Okay. Amazing. Anything else you wanted to touch base on before we jump in?
No, I don't think so.
Perfect. Amazing. So I'm wondering if you could start by just briefly introducing yourself and sharing a bit about your background.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up, and were you raised in a particular religious or spiritual tradition?
Okay. My name is Bonnie Violet Quintana, and I am trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. And I grew up in a little town called Wendell in Idaho, population 3,000. It was 3,040 years ago, and it's still 3,000 now. Let me turn that off. I grew up in that little town to a family that were not church-going folk. But my aunt took me to church when I was really young, I think like 5 or 6, and I loved it. And so I really got into church and was a Jesus freak, loved Jesus, loved, bringing people to Jesus or whatever. And it was like a safe place for me. I would say in my family, it was the first queer thing I did was go to church. And go ahead.
I was just going to interject and ask, do you remember anything about that church, if it had a denomination or what size it was, things like that?
The very first church I went to was a free Methodist. I think it was a free Methodist church.
Okay.
And my aunt had just taken me to that when I was young. I would say I don't remember a lot of my childhood because trauma. But
sure.
I did go to that church, and I have more memories from when I was like more of like a teenager, and I went to Hagerman, Idaho, which is a town about 10 miles away, where I went to a non-denominational Christian center.
Got it. Okay, great. Sorry, you can keep going. Is there anything else you wanted to share at this point about your background?
I'm trying to think. I don't know. I don't know what's interesting to you.
I was interested when you said that you experienced church as maybe one of the first queer spaces. Can you say more about that? What was queer about church for you at that age?
Well, I think the queerness was just in the sense it was very much outside of the norm of my family and the people that I grew up with, if that makes sense. So it was queer in that sense of me being outside of my social norms or family norms, that sort of thing. So, but as far as like the church itself being queer, as in like LGBTQ or anything like that, I wouldn't say that. But I wouldn't say that.
Okay. No, that's a great distinction. Okay. So I'd love to hear more about your journey to becoming a chaplain. It sounds like you had a love for church, at least this version of church, at a young age. How did you go from being in this space to becoming a chaplain?
Oh, that was a long journey.
Okay. Feel free to only share whatever you want to share about that journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think kind of the cliff notes, if you will, or the milestones is, when I graduated high school, I moved out to Phoenix, Arizona, where I went to school to be an architect, an actor, a model, and a preacher.
Wow.
all within a very short amount of time. And as young people, we're often trying to figure out what it is that we want to do and be. And I had gotten a calling after going to architecture school and acting and modeling stuff, and I felt the call to work with young people in churches with theater specifically as the tool, because that's what I had gotten to do when I was at that little church here in Idaho. We did theater productions, and I thought that was just really cool. And so when I moved out to Phoenix, Arizona, I got involved with a mega church out there. It was mega, like it was huge compared. I mean, like I think sometimes the congregation was like 1,000 to 2,000 people, which was almost like my hometown. So it was a huge, it was a huge shift for me. But I loved it a lot. I loved it a lot. It was just kind of like, as I was moving to a new city and doing all that, my aunt was a Christian who was very involved. Like the aunt that took me to church is the aunt I moved to Phoenix to live with as well.
Got it.
And so I was really kind of into that. I think I was really shy, and I really struggled. I remember it's kind of random, but one of the roles I had to play was this very like masculine kind of macho kind of person, like Tim Allen from Home Improvement. And I struggled really bad. But I tried. And so anyways, in a very short amount of time, when I was 20 years old, I was diagnosed with HIV, and I just barely turned 20. And that caused me to really, it pushed me kind of out of the closet in a lot of ways as a queer person. I hadn't shared that at church. I had actually left Grand Canyon University to be a pastor because I'd kind of started to feel like things weren't aligning anymore with my life and who I was, and kind of being in that sort of environment.
Sure.
And so I was kind of exploring and figuring out what it meant to be a queer person on my own. And then that's when I found out that I was HIV positive the first time I ever got tested. And that really was one of the big things that kind of pushed me out of the church and away from religion. I did not feel like I could go to my community, to go to my church and tell them what was really going on with me. And it was a very scary and difficult time for me. And it was the first time in my life that I couldn't go to church. And I guess the God thing was something that I just didn't have the capacity for, in the sense of I felt like God loved me anyway. That's the key, loved me anyway. I wasn't sure why or how. And so because I couldn't quite, I guess, come to that understanding on my own, I just kind of put God on a shelf and lived my life, thinking maybe one day, I might be able to go back there. And then I would say like the queer community and the club scene and drugs and alcohol and all that sort of stuff became my new church, my new religion, and my new safe space. It was such a gift in a lot of ways to kind of be thrusted into this queer group of people who loved being queer and lived out loud as queer folk for the most part. And I didn't know how. I mean, I remember I had just got a job at a gay bar to learn how to be gay, because I didn't grow up around gay people or queer people. I didn't see them on TV. I didn't see them in town. I didn't, it was like they were an invisible community for me growing up. We didn't talk about it in church. I don't recall people being hateful to queer people. Sure. We were just very much invisible.
Right.
So, which I think in some ways was almost just as harmful. I don't know. Yeah. That just wasn't my experience, so.
Yeah. So then how did you go from being in this sort of new religious space, this new community, you're sort of finding, like you said, your new form of spirituality. How did you go from being there to actually becoming a chaplain? What chaplaincy look like for you?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, years down the road, I kind of I ended up moving back to Idaho when I was 21 because I was having really major health problems and I had to get into care and I needed to live with my parents. So I moved back in with my parents at 21. And then at 24 years old, I started a nonprofit, an HIV/AIDS organization in Idaho, where we just tried to create a space where normal people, well, as normal as I was and my friends were, could do something about the HIV epidemic in our community in Idaho, because there wasn't any sort of organization or anything like that. And there definitely wasn't a space for just like community folk to like do something. And so I did that for about 10 years. And about the last 3 years of that, I got sober. I ended up getting sober from drugs and alcohol. I had in the beginning, drugs and alcohol were really helpful and useful, and they softened the blow of life. But eventually they made life a little bit more difficult. I felt like I had reached the point of life that I could do with substances being a part of that, and I had to find a way to let go. And that's when I met queer people who talked about God and had a reliance on God that I had never had before. And I was just perplexed and confused and in awe and just like deeply desired that, I think, more than me even not wanting to use substances. Like I had missed and really wanted to have that spiritual way of life again and to really connect more intentionally to my purpose and I guess mattering in some ways. And so, which is weird because my life had already been doing all that. It just wasn't wrapped or threaded in a spiritual way. And that came in time, where I could begin to lace my narrative, my entire narrative, with a spiritual thread, even when I wasn't going to church or actively seeking God. I would say that was actually when I first fell into grace, because so much of my life before that, I was trying to do everything I needed to do to be right and correct in order to please God. And when I just had to like let go and let God be God and me just try to be okay, I think that's when I really fell into grace and really began to understand what that meant. That, value and worth without earning it. And so, so in recovery, that's when I started getting open up to this idea of God again. It wasn't the God that I grew up in church. I really had a hard time being in churches for a while. I was very traumatized. And it was very difficult for me. I ended up landing in a United Methodist Church in Chicago, which I had moved to Chicago after running the HIV/AIDS organization. And I landed in a church because I was setting up HIV testing center within their church. And I got stuck sitting through the sermon that day. Oh. And it was a queer person who was a drug addict in recovery talking about their relationship with God. And I just was like, it was like one of those moments where I felt like it was all just for me. Like everything aligned in a way that was like, all right, girl, this is where you're meant to be, and everything that's happening right now was set up for you, which I know sounds really whatever, but that's like the way that it felt in that moment. Like I was exactly where I needed to be to hear what I needed to be. And I cried the whole sermon next to this stranger. And I found myself going to that church every week after that for probably a year or more. And I cried every Sunday, and it was one of the things that I did no matter what. And I don't know why, but it just was so important for me to go there and be celebrated and seen in the fullness and my queerness, surrounded by old people and young people and like people who looked a lot like the church that I grew up in as far as the people there. It was important for me that I was in a church that wasn't just a bunch of queer people. I think in order to feel like it was authentic or close enough to what I was raised in, I guess. And that is where I eventually ended up doing a chaplaincy training after the death of my nephew. He had died in my arms, and I ended up being like the queer person in between my brother and his Mormon wife's family. and then my family, which, you know, people died and you threw a party and got tattoos. So I found myself in the in-between of the both families and the many different ways of expressing grief and loss. And in some ways I never felt, it was one of the first times I could just let go and let God. I practiced be still and know, and I just was like, I do not know what the best result for this little boy is right now, so I'm just going to show up for the people around me and do what needs to be done. And after having that experience of like holding him as the usher, singing at his funeral in the Mormon temple, you know, adjacent to the temple, and just like all these sorts of things, I was just like, I want this back again. Like I want to be back into this idea of intentionally spiritual kind of mission or work, if you will, but with queer people. And how can I do that? And so that's when I started as kind of like a queer chaplain. And I always just was like a chaplain of another sort. So I wanted to be with people around death and dying and self, mainly in the form of identities, because that's where I had been without an awareness and an intention of God in my life, actively in my life and a part of my life. And so I wanted to help people hopefully not go through that same experience that maybe they could go through as identity shift, because often identity shifts are very disruptive, and there's lots of grief and lots of remorse and lots of excitement and lots of everything, right? And how great would it be to be able to have some sort of access to to your spirit through that process, to kind of animate you and, you know, get you through that process, maybe even make it hopefully a better experience for you, or provide some sort of comfort or what have you. And helping people identify, I believe that we all are already doing it anyway. And it's really just about bringing in awareness. And so it was really about helping people identify, so what is it that gives you life? What is it that is causing you to get up every morning? What is it that is animating your body to react and be in the way that it is? And how can you begin to engage with that? And you don't have to call it God, and you don't have to do it as a religion. For me, it was popping ecstasy and going on the dance floor for a while. That was my, spiritual ritual, if you will. And that's where I got my life. That's where I got my joy. That's where I let go of the woes of the world and life. And so really trying to help people find, hopefully healthier, ways of connecting with that, or just again, becoming awareness. So really helping people lace their narrative with a spiritual thread. I think that helps to build one's to remind people of their resilience. I think it builds our faith, because we can begin to see over and over and over and over and over truths that can help us feel a little bit more strong in our faith, and give us hope that when we're unable to have that awareness, or we lose that awareness, that we can still know in our heart and in our intuition that it's at play. We just don't have the capacity for it. I often say that God fails me. And it's not God that fails me, but it's my understanding of God that fails me. And when I get to that place, talking with other people about their experience with God, or however way they want to call it, I'm using God just because it's easier, that helps me expand my understanding of God, which allows God to be a little bit bigger, just long enough for it to be helpful, I guess, and useful to me.
Amazing. This is so helpful. And I think we'll get more into some of the sort of spiritual and theological implications of all of this, specifically in the context of drag, later on. For now, I'm wondering if we can pause. I'd love to get a sense of timeline, if you're willing to share, just because I find dates can be helpful for anchoring people when they're reading a story. So do you mind sharing, like, what year you started college, what year you were diagnosed with HIV, what year you would have started recovery, when you would have started chaplaincy training, those sorts of things? Yeah.
So I graduated high school in 1997. That's when I moved out to Arizona. At 19 is when I left left Grand Canyon University. Actually, I was 19. And I had started at 19. I pretty much left my first semester of at the university there. I left after the first semester. At age 20, I was diagnosed with HIV, which caused me to come out publicly as a queer person, a gay man at that time. That's how I understood myself to be. And then in 2003, I started the HIV/AIDS organization in Boise, Idaho. In 2008, I got sober, started my recovery journey with a spiritual lens. I had tried in a lot of ways for years prior to that, but not with the spiritual solution until 2008. I moved to Chicago in 2012. I went to chaplaincy training in Chicago in 2014, and that's when I interviewed my first drag artist about their spirituality, and kind of began that journey. And then 2018, I moved to San Francisco, and I lived there for 4 years. And I was not trying to think and I'm 16 years clean and sober today. In 2018 to 2022 I went nomadic. I gave up my home in San Francisco. I gave up everything, my jobs, everything, and just became nomadic and homeless for almost 2 years, and just kind of traveled around and saw people that I'd met over the years and met new people, and just kind of went from place to place to kind of try to find myself. And then about a year ago, I moved back to Idaho, to Boise, which is about 100 miles from my hometown, because I felt called to come home. I felt like as an act of gratitude to come home, because so many of my friends had died since I left, and I wanted to come back and claim my home. I don't think anyone should have to leave home to be okay, but I had to, and I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do that, and I want to come back. And I think there's a special sort of healing that I need to experience that can only happen from being here, because of the people that are here and the community that I can make, and then also just being able to hopefully be a part of making this a better place for people like myself and people different from myself.
Wonderful. All right. So you mentioned interviewing a drag artist. I think you said 2014. Was that your first encounter with a drag artist? Had you encountered drag artists previously? Can you sort of walk me through how you became acquainted with drag?
Yeah, no, I mean, when I ran the HIV/AIDS organization in Idaho in the early 2000s, I worked with a lot of drag and drag artists because they raised a lot of money for HIV and AIDS, and they've been doing that for decades. Wow. And so, however, I was very challenged, to be honest, with the drag community at that time. I think for me it was probably a lot of internalized transphobia, and there was also a lot of just proper etiquette and things that I really struggled with the community. I think really more so it probably had to do with internalized transphobia and homophobia and all that sort of stuff. I had tried drag when I was in my early 20s when I worked at that gay bar. And I did it, and I just was confused because guys would hit on me as the cocktail server and also as the drag artist, and I didn't want people to think that I was a guy who wanted to be a girl or was a girl, but that I was a dude who liked dudes, and so. And I think that's obviously a very severe reaction to something. So I think that was still kind of playing out at that time of my life. As I moved to Chicago and kind of was a little bit more open to the spiritual aspect of my life and seeing my community, queer folks, and the different scenes that I was a part of with advocacy and just so many things, I saw drag artists as because I was kind of trying to think what's our substitute, if you will? Because I only had a lens of growing up in church, and that was spirituality, and that's what gave me life. And so I'm kind of looking around at my community now, and it made sense that the drag artists were the preachers. And you know what I mean? And so I thought, oh, well, they're kind of like the preachers of our community. And I had just such an awe, and I loved them, every aspect of it, from their humor to even their crassness at times to their charity work. I was like, in a lot of ways, I saw drag artists doing what I thought good church would do: raise money, bring awareness, bring joy, be in the community in a way that is for them, and includes us and is led by us as well. That we're not just relegated to the shadows and the dark spaces, even within our churches. And so then I started to talk to drag artists about their experience. And so I interviewed a couple of my friends, Miss Penetration and Cleopocalypse, it was really random. I don't know why. I was just like, I need to interview these drag artists, and I'm just going to have them over to my house, and I'm going to have my friends set up a camera, and we're going to do it. And I'm not sure why, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but we're going to do it. And so we did it. And then I did nothing with it for years, except for I had done it. And then I kind of picked it back up around when I was living in San Francisco, and got involved with Glide Memorial, and I don't know, it just kind of like built with interviewing more drag artists. And then the pandemic happened, and then it made sense to do things more electronically, or digitally, which actually allowed me to meet and connect with more people. And so that's when I started interviewing even more drag artists. I think I've interviewed like 58 drag artists on my podcast about their experience with drag and spirituality, and so really helping them lace their drag narrative with a spiritual thread. And so like the thing I love about chaplaincy, that it's not about my spirituality or my religion or my understanding. It's about you and yours and your experience. And so I love talking with people about their experience and how they've experienced. So a lot of times it's trauma and drama, and like I hate religion, to like I freaking love religion and it always embraced me and loved me. You know what I mean? So it's there are some similarities, but and some people are very integrated already, and other people it's very separate. They're like, I go and I bless people with oneness blessings, during the week, and then on Saturday I get in my dress and my makeup and my lipstick, and I kind of am a little like trashy or whatever, and the two don't meet. It's almost like compartmentalized, and so the process is really kind of to see how those two things are a little bit more connected, that they're not, it's not like you leave your spirit at the door in order to, you know what I mean? So,
yep.
So that was really a lot of it. And then through that process, I started to meet more and more drag artists, and many of us who are willing to say that we have spirituality or spiritual experience and talk about drag, because most drag artists are like, stay the frick away from me. I don't want to talk about any of that sort of stuff. So it's not like every drag artist. But I started to meet these folks, and a lot of these folks were maybe like one person in this town or one person in this area. And there was a lot of like isolation, a lot of like, we're mavericks in our community, or where do we do spiritual drag art? Where do we, do these sorts of things? And so then that's when the Drag and Spirituality Summit kind of came into play, of trying to create a space where we all could come together and share what our experience is, and have opportunities to perform our spirituality, and to talk about our spirituality on panels, and to listen to other people share their experience, and to invite spiritual leaders to come and learn from us on how they can better serve us. And so that started in Chicago 3 years ago. We did San Francisco last year, and we'll be in Toronto this year, and next year maybe Salt Lake City. Yeah, so we really try to bounce around to different parts of the countries and the world. I'd love to be like in London or Germany maybe one day, or I don't know, like it can go wherever. In order for accessibility purposes mostly, so that more people would have an opportunity to be in this sort of environment in which they can, just kind of, be in community around spirituality and spiritual matters while in drag.
Okay, great. So I'd love to learn more about the Drag and Spirituality Summit. Can you talk about, I have so many questions. I guess first, I'm wondering if you could talk about the first summit and like, how many folks were there, and were there, well, you know what, actually pause. I'm going to be more selective. First, can you talk about how the summit has evolved over its 3 years of existence?
Yeah, so it's very much it's very grassrootsy, and probably the most grassrootsy way you can think. In part, I think, it started in Chicago and in San Francisco. Those are both cities that I live in and reside in and have strong connections with different communities in, so it was a little bit easier to get set up. So the Urban Village Church, where the United Methodist Church, where I did my chaplaincy, I was able to collaborate with them to help us put on the event in Chicago to really kind of anchor it. We had that and it's just like, and so each conference or each summit in and of itself, and there's a whole story there. Like, initially I called it Spiritual Drag Con, but I got a cease and desist from RuPaul, so I had to change the name. So now it's Drag and Spirituality Summit. Sometimes we'll call it DRESS, DR and SS, like dress. So each kind of city, it kind of adapts to what makes sense in that city and who's interested. So I usually always try to have virtual aspects to it as well, to where, again, out of accessibility, we stream it on YouTube live. And basically it's usually like, 3 days, like a half, like noon to 5 or 6 on Friday, all day Saturday, and then Sunday kind of like a 10 to 2 thing. Every day we have a keynote speaker, we have a plenary speaker, and then we have some sort of like spiritual drag show. And so on Friday and Saturday nights, those are typically just, people are just said, perform your spirituality or do some sort of spiritual performance. And so for some people, it's very like religious, and in others it's more of like, Beyonce gives me life, so I'm going to do Beyonce, or you know what I mean? Like, it's a very wide range of experience and performance. And so I don't really, I don't censor. I'm like, do what you want to do, especially on the Friday or Saturday nights. It's usually more of an adult crew, so there can be kind of religious trauma and heavy issues, or we can kind of go the gamut. And then usually on the Sunday we do something that's more family oriented and geared toward if there are children in the room, and families, and so it's more of like arts and crafts and Bible stories and sing-alongs and things like that on the Sunday.
And how would you summarize what the goal of the summit is?
Yeah, so really, I think the biggest thing is just to create an opportunity for us to connect with other people on a similar journey as our own. Again, I don't think we have a lot of opportunities and spaces for drag to exist in intentionally spiritual space. So it's about the drag artists and helping them have an opportunity to become more integrated and to share and witness other people's experience and expression. And then the other aspect is for spiritual leaders and providers to also be available to learn from us. So we usually have chaplains set up the whole time. We have chaplains assigned to every activity that we do, so that if something is brought up for folks and they need to talk to somebody, they can. Because for a lot of these folks, it's probably a bit of a brave space to jump into and start to really wrestle with some of this trauma. I mean, we ended up having, we were very intentional. Usually the first day is not taking place in a spiritual setting. Usually it's like a community center or something that's a little bit more of a neutral space. And then the spiritual drag shows, or say at a church with, stained glass windows and, and just like, it's like in a freaking church, right? And so, and to really kind of help people push through some of that trauma and to claim the space as their own, as them being a part of it. And so it's kind of like a combination of that for folks. So it's really just to kind of help people heal, witness, and support one another. And it's like, our goal is for it to be all, multi-faith, interfaith, all across the board. It ends up being a lot of Christian stuff because we're, in the US and Canada mostly is who's involved at this point.
Okay.
And, Christianity just kind of has impacted many of us in many ways, even if we don't identify that way. But we have like a range of Muslim and Jewish and like a range of folks, and we try to have as much diverse representation in our performance and our panels and our keynotes. But it's really just an opportunity to bring folks together, to charge, and to just create connections and really foster and cultivate more, more opportunities and more spaces, so folks can go back home and do what it is they need to do. And if that makes sense.
Yes, no, it definitely does. Okay. How many folks on average have you had each year? I know it's still early, but I just want to get a sense of size.
We anywhere from like 60 to 80 in person, and then usually another like 30 or so online.
Wow.
So it's not huge. It's still pretty cute.
That's impressive for something that's still just sort of in early stages.
And we went from like our first year, we had a budget. I think we ended up like having a budget of like 14 or 15,000. Last year we did the whole event in San Francisco with like, I think it was like a little over $5,000.
Oh my goodness.
So we're doing this on very like shoestring things, and we do our best to get, all the artists some sort of compensation, some sort of stipend. It's obviously not, it's not adequate for what they're doing, but it's not like, it's really not enough. But the artists that are coming and doing it are wanting to come and do it. So it's enough to kind of make it possible for them to have that opportunity. We're really excited for this year. We were able to connect with Emmanuel College in Toronto, Canada. And they are kind of, taking a big portion of it in through them. So they're providing the venue and the technology. And so a lot of the things that sometimes we can get clunked up on because we're all volunteers, or we're all kind of, what I mean? Like doing what we can to, like, a lot of the times we're in a different building every day, sometimes 2 different buildings every day for what we're doing. Trying to set up all the, technology and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite the task, which that takes a lot of energy. Whereas this year, I'm excited that we can spend a little bit more time maybe on outreach and fundraising, because we're not having to manage some of that other stuff. So really excited to be collaborating with Emmanuel College. I think we're anticipating to have more like hundreds of people in person. We're working with them to create a gala, and one of our event nights is going to be in this huge theater. And some people will be paying, some people outside of the conference will be paying like $100 to go to it, because we're raising money for a scholarship for queer people to go to Emmanuel College. So we're really excited about that and kind of like where this is going to lead. And my hope is that, also like these communities do more spiritual drag stuff after we leave too. If they weren't already doing it. So I think that's really a big part of it too. And so we're really excited about what it's going to look like in Toronto. One, it's cool that we're now officially like international as far as like locations and stuff. We've always had a strong contingent of Canadians who have been a part of the planning as well as participating. So it's been great to be able to go, to go there to provide to basically to have the event.
So when is the summit this year?
So the summit is set for November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Toronto, which is kind of like their break time. Like school is kind of out for a few days. And so that's how we can kind of access the university or the college space during kind of the school year, if you will. And so it's going to be taking place then, again, on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll have a similar format of, panels and workshops and keynotes and spiritual drag shows. And we're really excited for our Sunday event. I think we'll have an opportunity to really we tend to struggle to having families and kids come to the family events, mostly just because we either don't make the connections or it's really more of a capacity issue, I think, than it is about like people not wanting to come. And so really excited that this year at Emmanuel, I think there's a lot more kind of like connections and ability for us to have a good turnout. But at a minimum, we at least use it as an opportunity to workshop and share what we do with families and young people when it comes to spiritual drag art.
Yes. Okay, I don't know if my editors would agree to this, but hypothetically, if I can get them to like pay for me to come out there, would you be open? I mean, of course, check with other organizers, etc. But like, do you think it would be something that I could cover potentially?
Oh yeah, totally. That would be great. Yeah, if they would.
It just sounds so cool.
It's
so innovative, Like who else is doing this?
Yeah, I don't know that there is. So, it is a really powerful and special kind of thing that we get to do for sure.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna add that to my list of ideas and maybe see if I can convince my editors. Okay. I'm wondering if you can share a meaningful memory from one of those spiritual drag shows that happens on these Friday and Saturday nights at the summit. Was there a particular moment, performance that was especially impactful to you? And if so, can you sort of take me back there? Walk me through what that experience was like. What did you see? What did you feel? Were there certain colors or smells? What was that moment like?
Wow. There's just so many. It's so hard to like pinpoint one. Recently in San Francisco, there's this artist by the name of Maxima Light, who was actually on Legendary, the season 3 from the House of Light, which was one of the spiritual houses out of LA. And they came to San Francisco and they performed, and they basically did a ballroom scene performance in a church in front of the stained glass, and they came up to me afterwards and just was like, thank you so much for letting me do that. Like, I didn't realize how much I needed to express myself in this way in this place, because they grew up Catholic and grew up, you know what I mean, like all these sorts of things. So it was a very powerful thing to their healing. And that happens over and over and over, where I've had artists who are like, I don't know why I came, or like I felt really drawn to come. Sequin McQueen from Portland, Oregon, she ended up like getting to come this year, and she had planned to come to Chicago, but getting to Chicago was an issue. So coming to San Francisco was more doable. And for her, it was something that she too was like, I want to try to find a way to integrate my spirituality, because of the drag scene that I'm in. I don't get these sorts of opportunities. And so she was able to come and again, create opportunities to express that, and to be around other people who are trying to do the same thing to some degree. And a lot of it is just like internal stuff. I mean, for me, it's really like, it's pretty wild to hear people say like, oh, I've been following you for a while, or the work that you're doing, because a lot of this you hear nothing. The only thing I hear is, you're a pedophile, you're going to hell, you should die, all that's the loudness that I hear when you're a digital creator around queerness and spirituality. So it's really cool to be able to get into a space in here that people are finding ways to support one another, and they are getting something from even if it's just my random voice going live every now and again. And it's not like just me, because I get the same way from them as well too. Flamey Grant has been involved since the beginning.
Yes.
So that's been really fantastic as well. We've had, we've just had such a wide range of people who've been involved in some capacity. And the cool part is, throughout the year, we do the Dragon Spirituality interviews for the podcast and YouTube channel. So there's things that we try to do, year round. I don't know where I was going with that. I lost my train of thought.
Oh, no, this is great. I had asked about a specific memory or moment that you might have had. And I think you were sort of talking about how there wasn't one moment. It's all of the moments.
It's one after another after another. I mean, I'm sure people have been to camp or been to a conference or been to a retreat, and it's such a life-altering, changing experience. And that's really what it is for many of the folks.
Can you, if you remember it, I think having a specific, being able to sort of describe one of these memories just for the readers to give them a sense of a glimpse of what this might be like could be helpful. Could you, if you remember, go back to the ballroom scene you mentioned?
Mm-hmm.
You said their name. Maxima Light.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about their ballroom performance in that stained glass setting?
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like? What did the church itself look like? Even what was Maxima Light wearing at the time?
Mm-hmm.
What were their movements like?
Yeah. So I mean, on that, it was that evening we all kind of started to come into the church. It was this big open church, very high ceilings. There was stained glass, behind the main stage where we performed. There's the lines and lines of pews. The audience is sitting in the pews. Maxima is called up, and they're they were, if I recall correctly, they were in this bright, fluorescent pink kind of get up. I think probably some really short shorts and some some sort of dance, because they're dancer and stuff. So I feel like it was sparkly and stoned, and I really want to say it was bright pink. And it was basically if you've ever seen the a ball on TV or Legendary, they basically just had the same music, and they did the duck walking and the voguing and the the dips and the all that sort of stuff, and just really just kind of ate it up as if they would at a ball, and just just unabashedly express themselves in their queerness, even sexuality, their Latinus, just everything was just all wrapped in that performance, from the style of dance to the way that they dressed and the way that they I don't know if that helps. And then of course the whole audience is doing the little claps and doing the same things that you would see happen in a ball, say if you're watching Pose, except for it's happening in a church, and the audience is getting their life in the same way and reacting in the same way. And it's just it's just powerful. We had, it's just like that over and over and over. We had a drag performer perform who was pregnant last year and did this beautiful number as well, and revealed their pregnancy and was able to talk about that because they were about to have their child, and I think they were actually, it was they were a surrogate, and so they were able to kind of talk about that a little bit. I know that kind of goes a little off, but there's just so many amazing people and their experiences.
And do you usually perform at the summit as well? Or are you sort of taking a more behind the scenes role, making sure everything happens?
I really try to create the space for people to be in. that doesn't mean like I gave up plenary last. Most times people are like, you got to say something, you got to do something, and I'm like, but I'm just kind of like, no, like I like this isn't like about me, and I'm also not. I'm not a big like performer in the sense of like I'm not one to lip sync or like I'm a very like inside myself kind of person. I'm fairly actually introverted. Like my drag, my visuals of my drag is my ministry. I'm always sparkly and I have an aesthetic and I have just an essence of myself that draws people in. And they react to my drag. I see people light up. I see them stand a little taller, or their eyes open wider, or their smile open, and then that kind of feeds me. And then it, like it's like so. I really am not like it petrifies me to go on stage and lip sync. Like it horrifies me. But I'll get in drag and get at a pulpit, and I'll talk to you about grace and God and sanctuary and all that sort of stuff. And I'll be nervous, but I'll do it and I'll love it. So that's typically what I do in drag is I usually speak or preach or perform some sort of like ritual or practice like weddings or naming ceremonies or, speaking at rallies, that sort of thing. I can do the stage performance stuff and I'm trying to lean into it a little bit more, but usually I have to have some sort of like, it's like some deep thing. I can't just like be fun about it. Like I have to like work through some like deep trauma on the stage in order for me to kind of like be like, okay, I'll do that. Which there's not a lot of stages for that. So, especially in Idaho.
Sure. Yes. I just this visual though of you preaching from a pulpit. I think even just that visual is so powerful. So can you say just a bit more about like the context in which that happens? Is that something that would happen in Idaho where you are currently? Do you sort of travel around the U.S. and do this kind of thing? Where does this happen? Yeah,
I have traveled around the U.S. mostly. A lot of the times there were other places that were more open to it than, say, Idaho. But last summer I was able to put together what we called a drag sanctuary. And basically I curated the whole service to be all done by drag artists. And the pastor was actually there the whole time, which oftentimes pastors would be like, yeah, you drag artists can come in, I'm going to go out of town, or, that sort of thing, which is fine. But this pastor really took it in to like kind of like be there and really like endorse us and introduce us. And so I had a drag artist who did like the worship, like the sing song with the kids and send them off to Sunday school and play the piano and sing a Brandy Carlisle song. And then I preached about what drag and sanctuary is and means. And then another drag king gave like testimony. And then another drag artist did like a performance, and so it was like the most attended church day that the pastor had ever seen. She was like, wow. Oh my God, where did all these people come from? She's like, I need to have drag artists every Sunday. So, and it was a really cool experience, and it was great that I got to do it here in Idaho. I was just able to put together a drag fashion show. I'm really trying to bring drag out of the dark, or out of the clubs and and those are great places, and I love that sort of drag. But I also feel like it can exist in other ways and other, so I put together a fashion show where drag artists basically put together a look to represent a cause that's important to them. And then did like a fashion show where they all came out and we read what their cause was and what their look was all about. And we had over 300 people show up, and it was all ages. It was free. We raised some money for like the ACLU and the Drag Defense Fund because they did consider making drag illegal last year in Idaho.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So yeah. They ended up not trying it this year. But I've been really trying to work to try to create stigma. One, I believe that spiritual trauma is is like a health concern for our community. You know, and something that needs to be addressed. So a lot of the work that I do is also to like, so that whole fashion show and drag event was pretty much paid for by different spiritual and religious communities. So we had like a synagogue, and we had a Unitarian church and a Presbyterian church, and you know what I mean? So it was a way for the community also to support our community in doing an event that celebrates us, and celebrates what it is that matters to us. And so that's really been a lot of the work that I've been doing, more so in other places, but really trying now to do here where I think it matters a lot.
Amazing. And I'm so sorry if you already said this. Is this through, like, do you have a nonprofit that you're doing this through? Is this a lot of just like grassroots folks pitching in? Like, how are you doing
Yeah, I ask myself that all the time. How am I doing all this? I did just now. I mean, usually what I do is I usually partner with like a nonprofit or a church or whatever, and kind of work more so like as a consultant. Many times there's not money, you know, for me. It's definitely been a difficult thing for me to manage or figure out. It's always weird, I think, to get money doing like spiritual shit and community shit. Like it's this weird sort of dynamic for me that I've had a hard time really embracing. I'm really starting to lean into that in the sense as a queer chaplain. I finally made an LLC just a couple months ago, which is a little bit like it's a business thing for now. But my plan is that a lot of these projects that I've created will eventually become their own nonprofits. But in order to have a nonprofit, you need to have a board, and you need to have, you know what I mean? There's a lot more to it. And so I did the LLC so that I can begin to, and I brought on a business partner to help me ask for the money that I'm uncomfortable asking for, doing these sorts of things, so that I can hopefully sustain myself a little bit more. Because I personally have went without a lot in order to live during my transition, which has been quite the journey the last 3 years as well, since I started transitioning 3 years ago. But it's gotten to a point where it's like I need to have a better quality of life for myself, and hopefully have an opportunity to have more collaboration, which just will make more things that much better and that much fuller, and that much more like diverse, and hopefully create more space for more people. So I'm really excited about being able to kind of like have those things happen at the same time now. I really feel like I've done the spiritual work and the mind work to really be able to find that balance. Because I'm not attached to a school, I'm not attached to a religion or a church or an institution, so there's not that like access to funds and money in the way that a pastor or you know, other folks have when they, you know, work with a church or an institution of some sort. But I think that's what allows me to be what other people aren't. That's what keeps me in the tween of things.
Okay, I know that I have had, we've been chatting for an hour. I have a couple more questions. How are you doing? Do you need to step away? Do you need water? How are you doing?
No, I'm okay. I have my coffee next to me, and I know it's been going a long time. I sometimes talk too much.
No, that is no.
Okay.
I mean, I think you've shared has been relevant, and of course I won't be able to include all these details in the story itself. Getting to know you, taking the time to hear more about your story will help ensure that I'm representing you well. You know, it just lays the groundwork for a more holistic and more nuanced and more accurate story in the end. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is sort of the spirituality and theology that happens in these spaces where drag and worship intersect. Obviously, there's not a one-size-fits-all, and like you said, in these spaces, these like spiritual drag spaces, folks are coming from all different places, and as a chaplain, you're not imposing any sort of one framework onto folks. But if you could sort of sit back and summarize, what are some the, I don't know, theological messages, or like what's happening spiritually in these spaces at this really powerful intersection?
Yeah, I mean, for some people, it's deeply rooted in religion and theology. Like, they could tell you why and how what they're doing is, like, in the Bible or in alignment with the Bible and the teachings of their religion and their, all that sort of stuff. Other folks, it's a little bit more loose, but I feel like there's just a lot of visible healing and expression that takes place. It's and like I said, I mean, sometimes it's very like people are sharing a prayer, or they're doing a worship song, or even in like some of the keynotes or panels, it's really more about like they're preaching or whatever. There are a lot of drag artists now that are preachers and do services in churches all over and other like spiritual settings and non-spiritual settings. I don't know that I'm trying to think where to go with that.
Well, I mean, just to pivot a little bit, how have you, I mean, I'm sure you have a million different thoughts, but how does drag intersect with your own spirituality? Could you talk a bit about how, again, this intersection of like drag and spirituality, drag and worship, what has that meant for your own spiritual evolution?
Yeah, I mean, for me, drag is what awakened and allowed me a space to find my transness and strength in being a trans person. I was able to put on items of clothing and express myself in a way that I could never allow myself before. And because there was a stage and because there was a charity we were raising money for or whatever, I could kind of lean into that. And I found myself not wanting to get out of drag, which was very different from all the other people around me, or most of the people around me. And so I believe that my transness is it's a direct response from my connection and seeking of God. I believe that I'm called, and God and myself are, we're creating. God didn't create me and just be done. God is still my creator, and we are co-creators in who I am in response to the world that I'm a part of in a way that I think best. I don't know. It's just like, for me, I have a hard time. I feel like God and spirituality is an experience that I think many people have, that when we speak about it, it falls short. It begins to not be adequate. For me, at least, I have a hard time. It's just an experience. I believe that we all do have a spirit. And so having some sort of activities or awareness or opportunity to speak about our spiritual self is spirituality in and of itself. And for some people, that's more practical. For others, it's religious. I don't know. It's still something I'm exploring, And I think I'm constantly trying to actually find evidence, if you will, that affirms my experience. That's I already know to be true. I think there's an internal knowing that we all have, an intuition that we all know that is unknowable at this time in our lives in a way that we could speak about or even understand or have the full capacity for. If that makes sense. So
yeah.
I grew up in Christian church, so I still love hymns, and I still like, sometimes I'll go to church in Milwaukee online because there's 2 trans friends of mine who run a church out there, and they're able to talk about Jesus and the Bible, and all that sort of stuff, and be in alignment with like, Black Lives Matters, and doing protests, and taking care of community, and and that they are able to do that all through, like, they are able to wrap it all in Jesus and Christianity and be like, see that it all makes sense. I struggle with that some days, to be honest, but it's what I know, and it's what I've known for so long. So it's, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it was really, one thing I do want to say though, it was really helpful for me to be able to be in a Christian space that reminded me of home and my original connection with God, in order for me to heal, even if I decided not to take that cross up, so to speak, again, which I don't think I have quite yet. I definitely haven't called it that. It could be what's happening, but I have not found myself labeling it in that way at this point in time in my life, because there's just so much harm that religion has done to me and my community, and continues to do. And there's just this like toxicness in and of it that's also, I just don't see it. I don't know. It's just hard to see the redeeming qualities, if you will, in the long run. Now, I've met amazing people who are in the systems and do really great stuff, but it's harder to get, I think, behind the bigger picture. And I think sometimes that's more about the people than it is about like anything bigger than that, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing in the U.S., maybe internationally, these days in terms of drag and worship? Is there momentum building around to this integration? Or is this something that's been around for a long time that folks are maybe only just starting to pay attention to?
I think that it is something that has been around for a long time. However, I think that there is a lot more push to it happening. There are a lot more people that are willing, and I think there are a lot more like spiritual spaces and spiritual communities that are better equipped and suited to create space for drag artists. They understand the value and the worth in doing it, and so they're really doing the work and have been doing the work. So I think part of it is we have more people who are healed or going through the process of healing, because there are communities and people who can help them through that process. And that there just are more places in which drag can be loved and embraced in a spiritual way. And I think just the fact that the way that social media and access to people and people's experiences is so accessible, it can make it seem really loud, even when just a few people are doing something. And I think that sparks and ignites others to do more. So I know for me, it was really important initially for me to see at least a part of me in other people who were living in a way that I didn't know was possible, that I lacked the imagination for, but could then begin to find myself somewhere in between them and the current me, if that makes sense. And so I think there's a lot more opportunity for people to see more of who they can be, and to see more of themselves, basically. And many of us are like, a big part of my spirituality is I believe that you have to give it away in order to keep it. And so, and I think there's an element of like, those who come before are able to help those who are not there yet. And in some ways that's kind of what needs to happen. And it's also what I think is best for the person, because at some point in time you stop needing to be the person to implement the change, if you will, and yet you have wisdom and experience that can be useful to that person. And it allows you an opportunity to speak to and speak of what it is that you have come to know and have come to understand and have come to experience. So I think it's one of those like beautiful, like kind of sacred economies where you get to a point where you need to be able to reflect and share what your life experiences and your things are. And the great thing is that other people want to hear that and need to hear that in order to grow as well. So it's like this beautiful thing that seems to work well for all parties involved.
What are other organizations, individuals, folks doing this work that I should maybe know about as I set out to report on this story?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you're familiar with King Jules in Canada. They are out of Toronto, Canada. They have been on the planning committee for the summit for all 3 years, and they have been very involved, and they're a big reason why things are going to be happening at Emmanuel College. They are going to seminary there, and they do a lot of their ministry through drag. So they do prayers for like testosterone and injections and name changes and on like TikTok and YouTube, and they travel around, and they are very rooted in, like, if you want to talk to somebody about their theology and their religion and how drag comes out of that, they are a great person for that. I'm trying to think of like some other folks that we work with. I don't know if you saw like we have I have the Dragon Spirituality podcast,
Yes.
where you can see like a few different interviews, but I also have it on YouTube where you can watch it, and we have like the Dragon Spirituality Summit. If you go to our website, dragonspirituality.com, you can see all our previous keynotes, their bios.
Oh my goodness.
A lot of them you can actually watch what they did. So,
wow.
So you're more than welcome to check out some of that stuff too.
Super.
And that might give you an insight. I'm trying to think of I think it's important to have some sort of diversity, and I'm just trying to think of because King Jules is another like queer white person in Canada. So
it is great. I'm trying to think of who. And even religious diversity. So I'm speaking to one person who's Buddhist, but if folks who maybe have Jewish or Muslim backgrounds would be amazing. Racial and ethnic diversity is always super. And if you want to take some time and think about it, or reach out to folks too and see if they're comfortable talking to me before, that's all great. Whatever is best.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's Mama Ganoush is a Palestinian drag artist who is doing a lot of advocacy stuff. That they might be a good person to talk to. Mama Ganoush out of San Francisco. But yeah, I'll think. For whatever reason, my mind is not going there.
That's great. I'll if I don't hear from you, I'll send you an email and just see if any other folks or even organizations came to mind. So I'll be writing about San Francisco Night Ministry, obviously the summit. If there are other places where folks are gathering to do this work, I want to know about those too. But I'll send you an email so you have time to think about it. Before I forget, Bonnie Violet, what pronouns would you prefer for me to use in the story?
She, they. I'm starting to play with they a little bit. She, they.
Great. And are you leaning toward one or the other for the story?
She.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's super. And if you change your mind, just keep me posted.
All right.
She is good. Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think might be helpful or important for me to know for this story?
Nothing is coming to mind other than what we've kind of spoke about. Yeah. I don't know if I'm just at capacity or
yes.
My brain's I'm getting ready to be on be at a summit here in 40 minutes too, so I think I'm trying not to
oh my goodness please,
think too far ahead.
Yep. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for making the time for this call. I'll be in touch over email, but I wish you all the best for your upcoming summit, and yeah, we'll connect, and just truly thank you so much for your willingness to answer these questions. This has been so helpful, and I'm really pumped about this story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And this was an interview with the Religious News Service on June the 13th, 2024. Hey y'all, Bonnie Violet here again. Just wanted to take a second to let you know about Splintered Grace Podcast. Splintered Grace Podcast just completed its 5th season entitled Still Seeking. Splintered Grace is a podcast that I co-host with my aunt, who is a conservative Christian and one of my biggest supporters in my trans identity and just life in general. While many family members are choosing to no longer speak, we have chosen to sit at the table and engage in difficult conversations to find peace and restoration. Over our 24-year relationship, we have had a lot of ups and downs, and we haven't always really liked each other. We definitely never understood each other, and still some of it we don't. But we love one another so much and so hard, and really work hard to show up for one another. And our hope is that by listening to this podcast, others may be able to begin to have peace and restoration in some of their other relationships with family members and or other loved ones. Check it out, Splintered Grace Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. Take care. Love ya. Bye.